The night the cold knocked twice. The wind howled like it had teeth. It slipped through the please subscribe our channel a story a day. And drop your comment where from you watching our stories. Thank you cracks of the old apartment building and rattle the windows of Daniel Carter's one bedroom, flat on the edge of town. Daniel pulled his thin jacket tighter as he stood at the stove, stirring a pot of soup that was more water than anything else. It was all he had left until payday. Behind him, his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, sat wrapped in a blanket on the couch, coloring quietly. Her small fingers were red from the cold, but she didn't complain. She never did. That hurt Daniel more than any unpaid bill. "Daddy," Lily said softly, holding up her drawing. "I made us a house with a big fire." Daniel smiled, forcing warmth into his eyes. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." He turned off the stove and poured the soup into 2 chipped bowls. The heater had stopped working weeks ago, and the landlord kept promising to fix it soon. Soon never came. Daniel worked 2 jobs, day shifts at a warehouse, nights driving deliveries, but it was never quite enough. Since Lily's mother had passed 3 years ago, life had been a careful balance of love and survival. A sudden knock cut through the wind. Daniel froze. No one ever visited. Another knock followed, weaker this time, like a hand unsure it should be there at all. "Stay here," he told Lily gently, walking to the door. When he opened it, the cold rushed in like an enemy. Standing there were 2 figures, bent and trembling beneath the streetlight. An elderly man leaned heavily on a cane, his shoulders hunched. Beside him, an elderly woman clutched a thin shawl around herself, her lips pale and shaking. "I'm so sorry," the man said, his voice cracked and hoarse. "We don't mean to bother you. We don't know where else to go." The woman swayed, and Daniel instinctively stepped forward, catching her arm. Her skin was icy. "It's freezing," Daniel said, shock cutting through his exhaustion. "You can't stay out here." "We'll move along," the woman whispered, eyes downcast. "We've already asked too much." Daniel hesitated. He thought of the empty fridge, the broken heater, the rent overdue. He thought of Lily behind him, small and trusting. And then he thought of his own father, gone now, who had once told him, "Kindness is never wasted, son, even when it costs you." "Please," Daniel said, opening the door wider. "Come in. At least warm up." The couple exchanged a look of disbelief. Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "Thank you," the man whispered, as if the words weighed more than gold. Inside, Lily peeked from behind the couch. "Daddy?" she asked. Daniel knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, we have guests." "They're cold." Lily immediately stood, dragging her blanket across the floor. She held it out to the elderly woman with a shy smile. "You can have mine," she said. The woman covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. Warmth in a borrowed home. The apartment felt smaller with 4 people inside, but it also felt strangely fuller. Daniel placed the bowls of soup on the tiny table, apologizing under his breath for how little there was. The elderly couple sat close together, their hands trembling as steam rose from the bowls. "It's perfect," the woman said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means to us." Daniel gave a tired smile. "I wish I had more." The man removed his worn hat and placed it carefully on his lap. His hair was thin and white, his face lined with years of hardship and dignity. "My name is Harold," he said. "This is my wife, Evelyn." "I'm Daniel," he replied. "And that's my daughter, Lily." Lily waved shyly, then sat cross-legged on the floor near the couple, watching them with curious eyes. Evelyn took a sip of soup, then paused as tears fell into the bowl. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We didn't expect kindness tonight." "Not anymore." Daniel frowned gently. "What happened?" Harold sighed deeply, as if releasing weeks of pain in one breath. "Our apartment building caught fire 3 nights ago. Electrical fault. Everything we owned is gone. Insurance won't cover it, and the shelter was full tonight. They told us to come back tomorrow." Evelyn's shoulders shook. "The cold. It gets into your bones at our age." Daniel looked around his small home, the peeling paint, the broken heater, the empty corners, and felt a wave of guilt for ever calling it too little. "You can stay tonight," he said firmly. "At least until morning." Harold's eyes widened. "We couldn't." "You can," Daniel interrupted gently. "I won't hear no." Lily stood and tugged Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy, they can sleep in my bed. I can sleep with you." Daniel's throat tightened. He knelt and kissed her forehead. "Thank you, baby." As the night deepened, Daniel laid out old blankets on the floor near the couch. The heater still didn't work, but the room felt warmer than before, filled with quiet conversation and shared silence. Evelyn sat beside Lily, braiding her hair with trembling fingers. "You're a very special girl," she said. Lily smiled. "Daddy says being kind makes your heart strong." Harold watched Daniel from across the room, his gaze thoughtful. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said quietly. Daniel shrugged. "I'm just doing what anyone should." Harold didn't respond, but his eyes lingered, as if memorizing Daniel's face. Later, as everyone settled down, Daniel lay awake listening to the wind outside. He worried about tomorrow, about food, work, space. But beneath the worry was something unfamiliar: peace. For the first time in years, his home felt like more than survival. It felt like purpose. What Daniel didn't know was that Harold and Evelyn were not just two homeless elders seeking warmth. They were carrying a secret, one that would soon turn Daniel's quiet act of compassion into a moment that would change his and Lily. Morning crept in slowly, pale and hesitant, as if unsure it was welcome. Gray light filtered through the thin curtains, revealing a world still locked in ice. Daniel woke to the sound of coughing. He sat up immediately. Evelyn was awake, her shoulders hunched as she pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. Harold sat beside her, rubbing her back with quiet concern. "I'm fine," Evelyn whispered when she noticed Daniel. "Just the cold lingering." Daniel moved quickly to the kitchen, reheating the last of the soup and adding hot water to stretch it. He wished he had eggs, bread, anything more fitting for guests, but this was all he could offer. Lily emerged, rubbing her eyes. "Good morning," she chirped, walking straight to Evelyn and hugging her waist. Evelyn stiffened in surprise, then melted into the embrace. "Good morning, my angel." They ate together in silence, the kind that felt heavy but not uncomfortable. Outside, the wind still howled, reminding them that the world beyond the walls was unforgiving. Harold cleared his throat. "Daniel, I'd like to repay you somehow, even just for the food." Daniel shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." Harold studied him carefully. "People like you are rare." Daniel gave a small, sad smile. "Doesn't feel that way most days." After breakfast, Daniel prepared for work. He hesitated at the door, guilt twisting in his chest. "I'll be gone all day." "You can stay here. It's warmer than outside." Harold's brow furrowed. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "Make yourselves comfortable." Once Daniel and Lily left, the apartment grew quiet. Evelyn sat on the couch, staring at her hands. "He doesn't know," she whispered. Harold nodded slowly. "No, and that makes it harder." She looked up, eyes filled with fear. "What if we ruin his life instead of helping it?" Harold took her hand. "Kindness like his doesn't get ruined. It gets rewarded." As the day passed, Harold wandered the apartment, noticing details Daniel never thought about. The patched shoes by the door, the overdue bills stacked neatly on the counter, Lily's drawings taped to the wall. "This man is drowning," Evelyn said softly. "And still he reached out to save us." Harold's jaw tightened. "Then maybe it's time we stopped hiding." That afternoon, Evelyn's coughing worsened. Harold insisted on taking her to the clinic. They returned hours later with medicine and a decision. That night, when Daniel returned exhausted from work, he found the couple sitting upright, waiting. "We need to tell you something," Harold said. Daniel frowned. "Is everything okay?" Harold met his eyes, steady and serious. "No, but it will be." Evelyn reached into her coat and pulled out a worn leather folder. Her hands shook as she placed it on the table. "We aren't who you think we are," she said. Daniel stared at the folder, unease creeping in. Outside, the wind fell silent, like the world itself was holding its breath. The truth behind the silence. Daniel sat slowly, the exhaustion in his bones suddenly forgotten. The worn leather folder on the table looked ordinary, yet it seemed to carry a weight far heavier than its size. "You're worrying me," Daniel said gently. "Whatever it is, you don't have to." Harold raised a hand. "Please, let us finish." Evelyn opened the folder with careful fingers. Inside were neatly arranged documents, old photographs, and a single business card, its edges frayed with age. Daniel glanced at the photos first. Harold and Evelyn, decades younger, standing in front of a towering glass building. Harold wore a tailored suit, his posture confident. Evelyn's smile was bright, proud. Daniel frowned. "That's you?" Harold nodded. "A long time ago?" Evelyn slid one document forward. Harold wasn't always a man searching for shelter. He built a company from nothing. Daniel's pulse quickened as his eyes scanned the paper. The name at the top made his breath catch. Even he recognized it, Harrison and Cole Industries. The company employed thousands. It dominated headlines, stock reports, and business pages. "You're saying—" Daniel stopped, shaking his head. "That can't be right." "It is." Harold said quietly. I'm Harrison Cole. Daniel leaned back, stunned. But you're homeless. Harold gave a sad smile. We stepped away years ago, handed control to people we trusted. Then Evelyn fell ill. While we were focused on survival, those people rewrote the rules. Evelyn's voice trembled. They froze our access to accounts, manipulated documents, and pushed us out, legally, cleanly. By the time we recovered, we had nothing. Daniel felt anger rise in his chest. Why didn't you go public? Harold's gaze drifted to Lily's drawing on the wall. Because fighting would have consumed what little life we had left. And because pride can be a cruel thing. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. So why tell me? Evelyn reached for his hand. Because you showed us kindness when you had no reason to. Because you trusted us with your daughter. Harold slid the business card across the table. This is my old assistant. He tried to warn me. If anyone can fix this, it's him. Daniel swallowed. I don't understand what this has to do with me. Harold met his eyes. Everything. That night Daniel lay awake again, but this time not from worry. From disbelief. The people sleeping under his roof were not just strangers in need. They were the key to a story far bigger than his own. And somewhere beyond the cold walls of his tiny apartment, a chain of events had already begun, one that would soon test Daniel's heart, his courage, and the limits of his quiet life. A door begins to open. The next morning felt different, heavier, sharper, as if the air itself carried the truth Daniel now knew. He watched Harold carefully as the older man poured tea with steady hands. No trace of the broken stranger from that freezing night. This was a man who had once commanded rooms without raising his voice. Daniel cleared his throat. What do you want me to do? Harold looked up. Nothing you're not willing to. That's not an answer, Daniel said, though there was no anger in his tone. Evelyn smiled sadly. We want you to help us meet someone. Just that. The assistant? Daniel asked. Harold nodded. His name is Thomas Reed. He'll listen, if he knows I'm alive. Daniel hesitated. He had a shift at the warehouse, a delivery route at night, Lily's school meeting in between. Life didn't pause just because destiny knocked. I don't have money for lawyers or fights. We're not asking for money, Harold said gently. Only time. Daniel glanced at Lily, who was tying her shoelaces. She looked up and smiled at him, trusting, unafraid. That trust decided everything. I'll help, Daniel said. The meeting was arranged for 2 days later at a small cafe downtown. Daniel wore his only clean shirt. Harold straightened his worn coat, dignity stitched into every movement. Evelyn held Daniel's arm as they walked in. Thomas Reed froze the moment he saw them. Mr. Cole? He whispered, standing abruptly. I thought you were gone? Harold finished calmly. Not yet. Thomas listened in stunned silence as Harold spoke. When he finished, Thomas leaned forward, eyes burning. They forged your resignation. I tried to stop it. Daniel watched quietly as two worlds collided, power and poverty, past and present. There's something else, Thomas said slowly, turning to Daniel. If we move forward, this won't be small. Media, courts, pressure. Daniel exhaled. I'm not afraid of pressure. I live with it. Harold smiled, for the first time without sadness. As they left the cafe, Evelyn squeezed Daniel's hand. You don't even realize what you've started. Daniel looked up at the gray sky. For the first time in years, he felt a door opening, one that led not to wealth, but to justice. And justice, he was learning, had a way of changing lives forever. When the world pushes back, change never arrives quietly. By the following week, Daniel felt it pressing in from every side. The first sign was a letter taped to his apartment door, notice of inspection. The landlord had never cared before. The timing felt wrong, too perfect. At the warehouse, his supervisor pulled him aside. Your performance has slipped, the man said flatly. Take care of whatever distractions you've got. Daniel knew then. Someone was watching. Harold noticed it too. They're testing you, he said calmly one evening. Seeing how much pressure it takes to make you step away. Daniel laughed without humor. They picked the wrong guy. Still, fear crept in at night. What if he lost his job? What if Lily suffered for his choices? He sat beside her bed, listening to her breathe, questioning himself. But Lily surprised him. Daddy, she said one night, half asleep. Are Grandpa Harold and Grandma Evelyn safe? Daniel brushed her hair back. I think they will be. Good, she murmured. Because helping people is brave. Those words carried him through the storm. Thomas Reed called the next morning. We have evidence. Bank records, emails, but the board is closing ranks. What do we do? Daniel asked. We make noise. Within days, journalists began calling. Harold agreed to one interview, then another. Photos of him and Evelyn surfaced, past and present. The story spread fast. Disgraced founder reappears, after years in hiding. And then came the backlash. Daniel's delivery routes were cut. His landlord raised the rent. Anonymous letters warned him to mind his own business. Evelyn wept quietly one night. "We never meant to put you in danger." Daniel looked around the apartment, still small, still cold, but filled with life. "You didn't," he said. "You reminded me who I am." When the board finally responded, it was with a lawsuit against Harold. "They want to bury him in legal fees," Thomas said grimly. Daniel clenched his fists. "Then they'll have to go through me, too." What Daniel didn't realize was that the world was watching. Him now, not as a poor single father, but as something far more powerful. A man who refused to step aside. The strength of standing still. The courtroom was colder than Daniel expected, not from the air, but from the silence. He sat beside Harold, Lily's small hand wrapped tightly in his own. Evelyn sat on the other side, her posture fragile but unyielding. Across the room, rows of polished suits whispered among themselves. The board members of Harrison and Cole. Industries looked nothing like the people in the old photographs. Power had hardened them. The judge entered. Silence fell. As proceedings began, Daniel felt the weight of every choice that had led him here. He was a warehouse worker, a delivery driver, a single father, completely out of place. Yet when the opposing attorney tried to paint Harold as unstable, something in Daniel snapped. "He sheltered us when we had nothing," the attorney sneered. A man desperate enough to fabricate. "That's enough," Daniel said suddenly, standing. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge turned sharply. "Sir, sit down." Daniel swallowed, then spoke clearly. "With respect, Your Honor, this man saved my family before I ever saved him. He's not desperate. He's honest." The courtroom stilled. After a tense pause, the judge nodded once. "You may speak, briefly." Daniel told the truth. About the freezing night, about Lily's blanket, about how two elderly strangers had shown him dignity by accepting help with gratitude instead of entitlement. When he finished, the silence was different, heavy, thoughtful. The media exploded outside the courthouse. Headlines shifted. Single father's testimony shakes corporate lawsuit. Donations flooded in. Public opinion turned like a tide. That night, Harold clasped Daniel's shoulder. "You didn't have to do that." Daniel smiled faintly. "Yes, I did." For the first time, the board looked afraid. And for the first time, Daniel realized something profound. Sometimes, standing still, refusing to move, to bow, to be silent, is the strongest action of all. The verdict of the heart. The trial stretched on for weeks, each day carving deeper lines into Harold's face and stealing more strength from Evelyn. Daniel balanced work, court, and fatherhood like a man walking a wire in the dark. Some days he nearly fell, but the support kept growing. Neighbors Daniel had barely spoken to before brought food. Lily's teacher organized a small fundraiser. Strangers sent letters, some with money, others with nothing but words of encouragement. Daniel taped the letters to the wall, a reminder that goodness still echoed. Inside the courtroom, the truth unraveled thread by thread. Thomas Reed testified, presenting emails and altered contracts. A forensic accountant exposed hidden transfers. One board member cracked under cross-examination, admitting pressure to silence Harold permanently. When Evelyn took the stand, the room held its breath. "They took our company," she said softly. "But worse, they took our dignity." And then, on the coldest night of our lives, a man with almost nothing gave us both back. Her eyes found Daniel. Lily squeezed his hand. The judge recessed for deliberation. Hours passed like years. Finally, the gavel fell. Harold Cole is hereby reinstated as the rightful founder and majority shareholder of Harrison and Cole Industries. A sob tore from Evelyn's chest. Harold closed his eyes, tears slipping free. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court recognizes Mr. Daniel Carter for his role in exposing corporate fraud and demonstrating extraordinary civic integrity. Applause erupted, unprecedented, unstoppable. Outside, reporters swarmed Daniel. "Why did you help them?" one asked. Daniel looked down at Lily. "Because that's what you do when someone's cold." That night, as they returned to the apartment, Daniel felt something settle in his chest. The verdict hadn't just restored a company. It had restored faith. And the greatest change was still to come. An offer that changed everything. The apartment looked smaller than ever once the noise of the courthouse faded. The applause, the cameras, the crowd, it all felt like a distant dream as Daniel set his keys on the chipped table. Lily kicked off her shoes and twirled, laughing. her joy untouched by the weight of the past weeks. Harold stood by the window, watching the city lights. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "everything changes." Daniel shrugged out of his jacket. "For you, maybe? I still have work in the morning." Harold turned, his eyes serious. "Daniel, I want to make you an offer." Evelyn reached for Daniel's hand. One made from gratitude, not obligation. Daniel stiffened. "If this is about money, it's about future," Harold interrupted gently. "Yours and Lily's." He laid a folder on the table. New, crisp, nothing like the worn one before. Inside were documents, neat and official. "Director of Community Operations," Harold said. "A new division. Fair wages, ethical housing partnerships, emergency support for families like yours." Daniel stared. "I'm not qualified." "You're exactly qualified," Evelyn said. "You understand need. You understand dignity." Daniel shook his head. "I can't accept charity." Harold smiled softly. "Then don't. Accept responsibility." Silence filled the room. Lily looked up. "Daddy, does this mean we help more people stay warm?" Daniel felt his chest tighten. He knelt and hugged her. "Yes, sweetheart, it does." The next day, Daniel resigned from the warehouse. His supervisor barely looked at him. Within weeks, Daniel was standing in rooms he'd never imagined entering. Listening, learning, building something real. He insisted on transparency, on second chances. Harold watched proudly. "You're doing exactly what I hoped." Daniel replied quietly, "I'm doing what you taught me, by trusting me." That night, Daniel tucked Lily into bed, not on the floor, not on a borrowed couch, but in a place that finally felt secure. For the first time since his wife's passing, Daniel allowed himself to believe. Life wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about becoming. The home that kindness built. Spring arrived gently, as if the world itself was learning to be kind again. Snow melted into soft rain, and the gray streets Daniel once walked with heavy steps now felt lighter beneath his feet. They no longer lived in the old apartment. The new house wasn't grand, no gates, no marble floors, but it was warm. Truly warm. Radiators hummed softly, windows sealed tight against the cold. Lily ran through the hallway on the first night, laughing as if she had discovered magic. "Daddy, it's not cold anywhere." Daniel leaned against the wall, overwhelmed. This wasn't wealth to him. It was safety. Harold and Evelyn moved into a nearby assisted living home, close enough for Sunday dinners. Evelyn's health improved with proper care, and Harold returned to the company, not as a ruler, but as a guide. Under Daniel's leadership, the Community Operations Division flourished. Emergency housing programs expanded. Predatory landlords lost contracts. Single parents received support without shame. One evening, Daniel stood before a group of families moving into new homes. He spoke simply. "Help shouldn't come with humiliation," he said, "because dignity is what keeps people standing." Applause followed, but Daniel looked for Lily first. She was in the front row, clapping the loudest. Later that night, as Daniel tucked her in, she asked, "Daddy, did you save Grandpa Harold?" Daniel smiled. "No, sweetheart. He saved us first, by trusting us." As he turned off the light, Daniel understood something deeply. Kindness isn't a moment. It's a foundation. And the home they now lived in wasn't built by money, power, or victory. It was built on one open door, on the coldest night of the year. The first anniversary of that freezing night came quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the soft drift of snow over an empty street. No headlines marked it. No news cameras captured it. The world outside had moved on to newer stories, louder scandals and brighter heroes. Yet inside Daniel Carter's heart, the date glowed like an ember that refused to die, reminding him of how a single act of kindness had transformed everything. It was early evening when Daniel found himself in the kitchen of their new home, their home watching. Lily carefully taped paper snowflakes to the window. Each one had been painstakingly cut, uneven but perfect in her eyes. Her laughter rang through the house, a sound Daniel hadn't heard so freely in years, a sound that carried hope and healing. "Daddy," she said, stepping back to admire her work. "Does this look like winter enough?" Daniel smiled, kneeling to her height. "Perfect," he said. "Even the cold outside wouldn't dare touch it." The doorbell rang, startling them both. Lily's eyes sparkled. "Grandpa Harold!" she shouted, sprinting ahead before Daniel could reach the door. He opened it to find Harold and Evelyn standing there, bundled in warm coats, faces glowing with smiles that mirrored the joy in Lily's heart. Harold walked without his cane today, and Evelyn's health had improved remarkably. Years of fear, uncertainty, and hardship had been replaced by resilience, warmth, and gratitude. "Careful, young lady," Harold said. laughing as Lily threw herself into his arms. "You'll knock me over." "I'm stronger now," she declared proudly, holding him tight. Daniel stepped inside, letting the door close behind them. For a moment, the four of them stood in the doorway, a family stitched together not by blood, but by trust, bravery, and shared hardship. That evening, the kitchen table was alive. It was still modest, still worn, but it was theirs. Daniel had roasted a chicken, baked bread, and brewed cinnamon. Tea, the smells filling. The space with warmth that had little to do with radiators or heaters. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, but more importantly, savoring each other. Harold cleared his throat, glancing at Daniel. "There's something I want to show you," he said, a flicker of mystery in his eyes. He handed Daniel a small envelope. It was thick, crisp, and unfamiliar. Daniel opened it to find a photograph inside, a building bathed in soft, welcoming light. Above the entrance, a sign read, "The Carter Cole Shelter and Family Resource Center." Daniel blinked, unsure he understood. "Harold, what is this?" Evelyn smiled gently, her hand brushing his arm. "It opens next week," she said. "We couldn't have done it without you." Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he studied the photo. This was more than a building, more than bricks and mortar. This was a promise kept, a promise born from the simple act of opening. A door to two strangers. On the coldest night of the year, Lily climbed into his lap, pointing at the photo. "Is that where cold people go?" "Yes, baby," Daniel said, holding her close. "It's a place where no one has to sleep outside. No one has to feel alone." Her small fingers traced the edges of the sign. "Good," she said, a serious note in her voice. "Everyone deserves that." The following week was a whirlwind. Families began arriving at the shelter, mothers carrying children, fathers clutching blankets, elderly couples holding hands to keep warm. Each face told a story Daniel recognized all too well: fear, hunger, despair. But in that space, they found something they hadn't known for years: safety, dignity, and hope. Daniel moved among them like a lighthouse guiding ships in a storm. He didn't just supervise. He listened, he comforted, he encouraged. Harold and Evelyn were there too, quietly ensuring the operations ran smoothly. Their pride evident in every action, but never overshadowing the spotlight. Daniel had earned. One morning, a mother with tear-streaked cheeks approached him. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching her baby. "We had nowhere else to go. You saved us." Daniel shook his head, trying to hide the lump in his throat. "You saved yourself," he said softly. "I just helped open a door." Lily, ever observant, tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy," she said, "look at all the people you helped." Daniel knelt to her level. "Yes, baby. And we'll keep helping more every day." As spring melted into summer, the shelter thrived. Daniel oversaw programs that provided meals, counseling, job placement, and emergency housing. Parents who had once slept on cold benches or subway platforms now walked proudly through the doors with their children. Elderly couples, like Harold and Evelyn once had been, found warmth and community. But even amidst the joy, Daniel never forgot the fear of scarcity. He still double-checked that every meal stretched far enough, that every blanket covered those who needed it most. The memory of that freezing night haunted him in the best way. It reminded him of why he could never be complacent. One evening, after a particularly long day, Daniel returned home with Lily. She immediately ran to the backyard, chasing fireflies, her laughter echoing like music. Daniel leaned against the doorway, taking a deep breath, letting the weight of the past year settle in. Harold joined him, a quiet smile on his face. "You did more than just open a door, Daniel. You built a home. For them and for yourself." Daniel shook his head. "I just followed what you taught me: trust, kindness, courage. Then teach it to others," Harold said. "That's how the world changes, one act at a time." That night, Daniel tucked Lily into bed, watching her drift to sleep. Beneath her blanket, the same one she had once offered a stranger without hesitation, she whispered softly in her dreams, "Mommy would be proud." Daniel kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby, she is." After she fell asleep, Daniel stepped onto the porch, staring at the quiet street of the neighborhood. The wind was cold, but it no longer felt threatening. It carried life, movement, and the memory of the night that had started it all. He thought back to that first knock on the door, the stranger seeking warmth, the soup too thin to satisfy hunger, the blanket his daughter offered freely. That single act of compassion had set off a chain of events far greater than he could have imagined. Through the past year, Daniel had learned something profound. Kindness is never small. It doesn't matter how little you have. What matters is the courage to share it, even when it costs you something, even when the world is cold. The next morning, Daniel visited the shelter early, before the first families arrived. He walked through the halls, empty and quiet, sunlight streaming through the large windows. Each room was prepared with care, beds made, supplies ready, walls brightened with artwork and notes of encouragement. He paused at the main hall and looked up at the sign, the Carter Cole Shelter and Family Resource Center. He smiled. The name didn't matter as much as the meaning. Every family who walked through the doors would feel the weight of generosity, the warmth of dignity, and the promise that someone cared. As the first families arrived, Daniel stood at the entrance with Lily beside him. She held his hand tightly, her small fingers wrapped around his. They greeted each family together, offering smiles, encouragement, and the kind of compassion that changed lives. Harold and Evelyn watched from the side, pride radiating from them like sunlight. Daniel realized, for the first time in years, that he had not only saved others, he had saved himself. The fear, the loneliness, the constant struggle to survive, they had all been transformed into purpose, into meaning. That evening, after the shelter closed, Daniel sat with Lily on the porch swing. The night was quiet, the stars bright. "Daddy," Lily said, leaning her head against his shoulder, "will we always help people like this?" Daniel hugged her close. "Yes, sweetheart. As long as we can." She sighed contentedly. "Then Mommy would be proud. And so would you." Daniel kissed her hair, holding back tears. "I hope so, baby. I hope so." He looked out into the night, imagining the countless people who would pass through their doors in the years to come. Each one would carry with them a story of struggle, fear, and hope. And each one would leave with warmth, safety, and dignity. He realized that life had not just changed for Harold, Evelyn, or himself. It had changed for every life touched by their actions. The warmth that had begun with a single open door on a freezing night had grown into a fire that could not be extinguished. It spread through every corner of their small world, and eventually, through the hearts of all those who entered. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the year lift from him. He knew the road ahead would not always be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and nights colder than any memory could prepare them for. But now, he understood something undeniable. Warmth, once given, never truly fades. It lingers, it grows, it changes everything. And in that knowledge, Daniel found peace, purpose, and the kind of love that no hardship could ever take away. He watched Lily fall asleep in his arms on the porch swing, the stars above them shining like tiny beacons. Outside, the wind whispered softly, but it no longer carried fear. It carried promise. A promise that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward, shaping lives, changing hearts, and warming the coldest night forever. Daniel whispered to the quiet night, "Thank you for reminding me that we are never truly alone, and that even the coldest winter can be warmed by the smallest spark." And in that moment, he knew, without doubt, that life had indeed changed forever. Not because of wealth, power, or chance, but because he had chosen to open a door.